Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The rain fell gently on the rusted zinc roof of their one-room house in the village, a familiar rhythm that usually lulled Ikenna into quiet reflection. But today, his hands trembled as he removed the old wristwatch from his wrist, the only luxury he owned. Its leather strap was cracked, the glass face chipped from years of use, but it still ticked faithfully. He stared at it for a long moment, as if weighing the memories it carried. The day his wife gave it to him on their wedding day, the day she died in childbirth, and every day since that he raised their son alone. His eyes filled with tears as he wrapped it gently in a piece of cloth and tucked it into his pocket. It would be enough, he hoped. It had to be. The principal at the school had told him Ikenna's WEC exam fees were due by Friday, or his son would not write. There was no other option. He was a retired teacher, surviving on stipends and borrowed kindness. But this was his son, his future, his legacy. Ikenna had never begged life for much, but today he begged for favor. When Ikenna returned home from school later that afternoon, his shirt stained with chalk and sweat, Ikenna met him at the door with a gentle smile. "Na'am," he called, holding out a plate of roasted yam and red oil. The boy smiled faintly, collapsing into the only wooden chair in the room. "Papa, we need to pay for WEC. They won't let me write the exam otherwise," Ikenna said quietly, trying to hide the worry in his voice. Ikenna didn't respond right away. He simply bent down beside his son and placed the wrapped wristwatch in his hands. "Take this to Mr. Emeka in town. He'll know what to do." The boy's eyes widened. "But Papa, this is your only watch. Mama gave it to you before she died." Ikenna smiled, brushing his fingers over his son's sweaty forehead. "And she would want you to succeed. If it means giving up everything, I'll do it gladly." That night, they sat in silence, watching the flickering lantern light. Ikenna's heart swelled with a mixture of sadness and pride. His son was going places, and if it cost him every comfort, so be it. A father's love, to him, was sacrifice without applause. The next week, Ikenna received a scholarship letter to study in Lagos. Ikenna was the one who escorted him to the motor park, carrying his small box on his head through the muddy road. He pressed a brown envelope with money into his son's hand, barely enough for the week, but he had saved it for this moment. As the old bus revved to life and Ikenna climbed aboard, Ikenna stood back and raised both hands toward the sky. "Chineke, guide my son. Let him never lack. Let him be greater than me," he prayed aloud in Igbo, his voice breaking with emotion. The boy waved from the window, his eyes unsure but hopeful. And as the bus disappeared down the dusty road, Ikenna remained standing, arms still lifted. His shirt clung to his frail frame. His slippers were worn to the sole. But his heart? It was rich with a hope only a father could know, the kind that expected nothing in return but to one day see his son succeed. 15 years later, the marble floors of Ikenna's Lagos mansion gleamed like wet glass under the light of imported chandeliers. Waiters in tuxedos moved quietly through the vast living room, offering glasses of champagne and small bites to guests dressed in satin and gold. It was a housewarming of the year, and Ikenna, now a celebrated tech billionaire with international partners, was the man of the hour. He stood tall in a tailored navy blue suit, one arm wrapped around his radiant wife, Tonia, who wore a sequined red dress with a thigh-high slit and glittering diamonds on her neck. Smiling for the cameras, they looked like royalty. But amidst the laughter, toasts, and flashes of fame, an old man stepped in quietly from the hallway, unnoticed at first. His slippers were dusty, his Ankara shirt loose and faded. Ikenna stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching a small paper bag with a flask of palm wine and a hand-sewn wrapper, his gift to his son. His face glowed with joy, though it was evident he felt out of place in this ocean of elegance. "Ikenna, your father is here," a driver whispered. Ikenna turned, momentarily surprised, and made his way over with a smile that was half genuine, half strained. "Papa," he said, hugging him lightly. Tonia looked on from a distance, her eyes narrowing in discomfort. Ikenna, unaware of the shift in energy, pulled his son close, and beamed with pride. "My son, Chinik has done it. See what the Lord has done." He opened the flask and began pouring a small amount into a cup. "Let me pray for you, in our tongue, so it will reach the heavens quickly." Before Ikenna could object, Ikenna raised the cup and began praying loudly in Igbo, invoking ancestral blessings and calling on God to bless the house with peace, many children, and good health. A few guests stifled laughter. Others looked around awkwardly. Tonia was mortified, her lips tightening as she watched from the staircase. When Ikenna finished, he looked to Ikenna with eyes brimming with tears, awaiting his approval. But the applause never came. Just silence. Later that evening, as the guests danced under blue LED lights and champagne flowed freely, Tonia pulled Ikenna aside into a private room. "Is that how you intend to mix our worlds?" she hissed, fury in her voice. "Your father turned this entire event into a shrine, chanting in Igbo like it's some village festival. We look like a Nollywood tragedy." Ikenna sighed, trying to explain, but she was relentless. "He's not just embarrassing. He's bad for our image. Investors were watching. Cameras were rolling." She flung her glass down, the wine splashing on the tiles. "If you don't set boundaries, I will." Ikenna felt torn. His heart pulled toward the man who had once starved to feed him. But his ego and the woman beside him whispered a different path. That night, his silence became agreement, and the cost of that silence would soon come crashing down. The next morning, the air was still heavy with perfume and leftover party noise. Staff were cleaning up, glass clinking, laughter replaced by the scratch of brooms and distant traffic. Ikenna emerged from his guest room in the boys' quarters, dressed neatly in a simple white shirt, holding a wrapper folded under his arm. He made his way to the main house with excitement. He wanted to say goodbye before returning to the village. In his heart, he was still thanking God for what he had seen, the palace his son had built. The men of his generation rarely lived to see their children rise this high. As he stepped into the living room, he saw Tonia on the couch, scrolling through her phone, eyes sharp. Ikenna stood beside her, arms folded. "Papa," Ikenna began, "Tonia said you embarrassed her yesterday. You should have asked before doing all that prayer and Igbo chanting. This is not the village." Ikenna paused, his smile fading. "I only wanted to bless the house, my son. A father's prayer." "Please, Papa." Tonia cut in. "This is not your kind of place. You brought palm wine and wrappers to a billionaire home. People were laughing at us." Ikenna looked from her to his son, stunned. "So I should not speak my language? I should not thank God for my son?" he asked softly. His voice shook, but his dignity remained. Tonia scoffed. "We are global people now, sir, not villagers." Ikenna turned to Ikenna again, searching his face for rescue. "Ikenna, is this how you see me too?" Ikenna, flustered and cornered, raised his voice. "Papa, please stop. You're making it worse." Ikenna took a step forward. "I carried you on my back when your mother died. I gave you my last. I wore torn clothes so you could go to school. And today, I cannot even pray in my tongue." "Enough!" Ikenna shouted and raised his hand, and in a flash of anger, he slapped him. Silence fell. Ikenna staggered backward, stunned. His eyes widened, not in pain, but in heartbreak. The room tilted. The man who once skipped meals to feed his son now stood with a trembling lip and glistening eyes, his cheek burning, not from the slap, but from the betrayal. A housekeeper gasped from the hallway. Tonia said nothing, only folded her arms, victorious. Ikenna did not shout. He did not curse. He simply picked up his wrapper, adjusted his shirt, and nodded slowly. "It is well," he said quietly. Then he turned, barefoot on cold tiles, and walked out of the mansion. Ikenna stood frozen. Tonia smirked and poured herself a drink. The morning after the slap, Ikenna awoke before the sun, just as he had done his entire life. But today, his bones were not weary from age. They were heavy with disappointment. The sunrise meant nothing to him. In the corner of the cramped servant quarters, he sat on the edge of the old mattress, staring blankly at the wrapper folded beside him. The air smelled faintly of cleaning detergent and distant perfume. For a long time, he said nothing, did nothing. Then, slowly, he knelt down and offered a prayer, but it was quieter than before, almost voiceless. His heart was full, yet broken. His hands trembled as he folded the warm wrapper and placed it into his small traveling bag. There was no chauffeur to take him to the park. No breakfast tray brought to him. No goodbye. Not even a knock on the door. Just the silence of shame. He slipped into his faded sandals, adjusted his cap, and stepped out. Ikenna walked through the compound unnoticed, past the polished Range Rovers and marble fountains, past the maids, who now avoided his eyes. He glanced once at the towering mansion, this dream his son had built, and the prison it had become. With every step, he remembered his own father's dying words, "Raise your child like a seed, but remember, some fruits fall far from the tree." At the gate, the security guard blinked in surprise. "Oga, you day go already?" Ikenna nodded with a forced smile. "I'm going home, my son. The city is too loud for an old man." The guard, sensing something wrong, stepped aside awkwardly. Ikenna stepped onto the dusty street, bag in hand, shoulders stooped, but not from age. Lagos life bustled around him. Honking cars, shouting hawkers, and the fast feet of strangers. But inside him, everything moved in slow motion. The betrayal clung to him like sweat. He boarded a rickety bus bound for the east. As the vehicle jolted past potholes and heavy traffic, Ikenna stared out of the window without blinking, his mind replaying that moment, the sharp sting of his son's palm against his cheek. The shame didn't come from the pain. It came from the silence that followed. The silence that said, "You are no longer needed." He thought of his late wife and what she might have said. He thought of all the things he wanted to tell Ikenna, about legacy, about humility, about the emptiness of riches without love. But the time for words had passed. Now he would go back to his compound in the village, sweep his old courtyard, feed his chickens, and prepare himself for the end. Not because he had given up on life, but because life had already given up on him. Back in the village, the evenings were quiet again. The crickets chirped like old friends, and the orange glow of kerosene lanterns returned to the walls of Ikenna's modest home. But something inside him had changed. His laughter, once deep and contagious, became shallow and infrequent. The neighbors noticed, especially Mama Uche, his longtime friend and widow, who often brought him soup. "Ikenna, you're shrinking," she said one morning, touching his shoulder as he coughed into a cloth. "You need to go to the clinic." But Ikenna only smiled. "I will be fine, Mama Uche. Maybe just old age catching up." But as the days passed, his cough deepened, and his appetite thinned like his bones. Alone in the house at night, he would pick up his small phone, scroll through the names, and stop at the one that mattered, Ikenna. His thumb hovered over the call button, then pressed it. The first time, it rang out. The second time, it was rejected. The third, fourth, and fifth, it rang endlessly without answer. Still, he persisted. Every night, when the air grew cold and his chest tightened from a coughing, he would try again. "My son," he whispered into the silence of the phone. "Just pick once. Just once." But on the other side of the city, Ikenna was buried in meetings, in parties, in the loud distractions of money and success, and in the poisonous whispers of Tonia. "Why is he calling again?" she would sneer. "He just wants to come back and embarrass us." Ikenna would nod slowly, guilt and pride warring within him. But ultimately, he would put the phone on silent and ignore the flashing screen. The deeper part of him didn't want to face the man he had slapped. It was easier to pretend the call never came than to answer and be reminded of who he used to be. As Ikenna's body weakened, so did his hope. Still, he continued to try, even recording voice messages when the line failed. "Ikenna, it's your father. I am not too strong these days. I just wanted to hear your voice. That's all. I love you, my son." He would end each message with a prayer. And each time, after pressing send, he would stare at the door, hoping, foolishly, that the knock would come. But it never did. Instead, he curled into his bed at night with his Bible pressed to his chest, coughing into blood-stained cloths, holding on to the thought that his son would come before the end. But the truth was, the end was already closer than he realized. By the third month, Ikenna could barely walk from the bed to the front door. His body had become a map of bones and veins. His once sturdy voice now a hoarse whisper. Mama Uche, alarmed by his worsening condition, gathered some money with the help of other kind villagers and arranged for a small vehicle to take him back to Lagos. "Go and see your son," she insisted. "He will do something. Maybe he didn't understand before." Ikenna resisted at first, but the aching in his chest and the hope in his heart overpowered his pride. With trembling hands, he packed his small bag, the same one he had carried away from the mansion. Inside it were 2 shirts, his medication, and a letter he had rewritten over and over. He wore his best native attire, old but neatly ironed, and boarded the battered bus heading to the city. It was a long, painful journey. His joints ached, his cough racked his frame, and the bus's engine screamed over every bump. When he finally arrived at Ikenna's estate gate, the sun was dipping into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of sorrow. Ikenna stood before the iron gates, barely able to stand. The security guard didn't recognize him at first. "Oga say him no day around," the guard grumbled. But Ikenna begged. "Please tell him his father is here." The guard relented and made a call. But the voice that answered was not Ikenna's, it was Tonia's. "Tell him to leave. Now." The guard hesitated, glancing back at the frail man with pleading eyes. "Madam say make you go," he mumbled. "Please," Ikenna whispered, "just let me wait. Maybe he will come out." Moments later, the front door of a house opened, and Tonia stormed out in a silk robe, fury written across her face. She stopped just past the gate, arms crossed. "So you came back again?" she snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. "After all the disgrace you caused?" Ikenna coughed, stepped forward slightly, and said, "My daughter. I just want to see my son. Please. I don't have long." Tonia laughed bitterly. "Your son has a life now. A real life. You think we need your sick body and your village walla? Go and die with your poverty. You hear me? Die with it." Ikenna stared at her in disbelief. Her words didn't just pierce, they crushed. She turned and walked back into the house. The gate slammed shut, and Ikenna, too weak to fight, too shattered to argue, slowly turned away. He walked down the street, slower than ever before, tears mixing with sweat, heart splitting with each fading step. The return journey from Lagos to the village was not one of survival. It was a surrender. Ikenna, gaunt and hollow-eyed, sat in the back of the cramped bus, with his head leaning against the rusted metal frame, the wind slicing through the broken window and rattling his bones. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. The journey, once filled with hope when he was taking his son to school, now felt like exile. This time, he was not returning from a visit to the city. He was returning from a final rejection. His joints ached from the long ride, and his cough had worsened, racking his chest until he bled into the cloth he kept folded in his pocket. The other passengers didn't ask questions. They glanced at him, this dying old man in traditional wear, coughing silently in the shadows, and looked away. When he finally arrived at the village junction, there was no one to meet him. He dragged his bag along the red earth road, pausing every few meters to rest beneath trees, his breath short and painful. Mama Uche, who had been sweeping her compound when she saw him staggering down the path, screamed, "Ikenna, Chinik, what happened?" She rushed to him, her hands trembling as she grabbed his elbow. He collapsed into her arms. His weight, or what was left of it, pressed into her chest. Together, they made it back to his compound, a small structure of cracked cement and rusted roofing sheets. She laid him on his bamboo bed, removed his shoes, and covered him with the same wrapper he had taken to Lagos, the one he never got to unfold before his son. That night, she made him pepper soup and sat beside him as he slept, murmuring prayers he was too weak to say. In the days that followed, Mama Uche became his caretaker. She fed him, bathed him, and read scriptures aloud when his voice was too broken to pray. Villagers began stopping by quietly, some bringing yams, others bottles of palm oil, but most came with silence. They all knew what was happening. The once proud man who raised the village's most successful son was dying, not from illness alone, but from heartbreak. He often murmured in his sleep, calling Ikenna's name or whispering apologies to his late wife. When conscious, he would stare out the window at the children playing in the dust and ask, "Did he call today?" Mama Uche would shake her head gently. "No, Papa Ikenna. Maybe tomorrow." But both of them knew tomorrow was growing thin. The sun was setting on his story, and the sun he longed to see was still nowhere in sight. Ikenna had always been a man of letters, even in a village where many thought words were wasted on fate. As a former teacher, he believed that written words carried a kind of immortality, that even when the body failed, the truth on paper could outlive the silence of death. In his final days, when his hands trembled too violently to write neatly, he still forced himself to hold a pen. At first, it was difficult. His fingers, crooked with age and illness, could barely grip the pen, but he persisted. What poured onto the paper wasn't poetic or eloquent. It was raw. A confession. A benediction. A farewell. He addressed it simply, "To my son Ikenna." It was not a letter of condemnation or rage. It was the opposite. "My son," it began, "I am not angry with you. I am only sad that we ran out of time while your heart was still busy." In the letter, he reminded Ikenna of the first time he carried him on his back to school through a flood. He wrote about the times they sat under the mango tree eating roasted yam, dreaming of a better future. He reminded him that love, not money, raised him. That it wasn't Range Rovers or mansions that built his foundation. It was sacrifice. He did not mention the slap directly. He didn't need to. "Pain," he wrote, "is not always loud. Sometimes it is in the quiet things, like watching your son walk away from your gate without turning back." And finally he wrote, "If you ever read this, and I am gone, know that I forgave you the moment your hand touched my cheek, because you were still my son, and I was still your father." He ended the letter with trembling words, "Come back to yourself, my child, before you too lose the thing that makes you human." Ikenna folded the letter carefully, placed it in a brown envelope, and slid it under the heavy leather-bound Bible that sat beside his bed. He pressed the Bible flat with both hands, closed his eyes, and exhaled shakily. That night, as the wind rustled through the cracked windows and the moonlight painted silver lines across the floor, Ikenna whispered one last prayer. "God, if you let me sleep tonight, let it be the kind I don't wake up from. I am tired of waiting." The house fell quiet. Mama Uche, sleeping in a plastic chair beside him, did not know it would be his last night. At dawn, when the rooster crowed and the world stirred again, Ikenna's chest did not rise. His eyes did not open. His hands were folded gently across his chest, and a single tear dried on his cheek. He was gone. Ikenna was seated in his study, sipping imported whiskey and flipping through a shareholder proposal, when his phone buzzed. He ignored it at first, brushing off the unknown number. But when it rang again, something about the rhythm made him answer. "Hello," he said flatly. On the other end, a voice quivered. "Is this Mr. Ikenna?" He confirmed. There was a pause. Then the words came like stones crashing into glass. "I'm calling from Yumidim village. Your father, Ikenna, he has passed away." The voice kept speaking, about the burial, the villagers, the arrangements, but Ikenna heard none of it. His hand dropped the phone. It clattered to the marble floor, screen still lit. He stared into nothing, his mind reeling. The world around him melted into a blur of silence. Dead? How? When? He had just been ignoring him. He had just been too busy. His chest tightened. His breathing grew shallow. Then suddenly, violently, he stood, knocking over the glass, the chair, his laptop. He staggered out of the room, clutching the wall, sweat breaking across his forehead. "No, no, no," he repeated, as if denying it would change the truth. He called the number back. "Are you sure? Are you sure it's him?" The voice answered, "We buried him yesterday. The whole village came. Mama Uche said he was calling you till the end. Even traveled back to Lagos, but your wife sent him away." Ikenna dropped to his knees. "What?" he whispered. "He came to Lagos?" His voice cracked. "Yes," the caller confirmed. 3 months ago. He was very sick. He begged to see you, but they turned him away at your gate. He went back broken. He died broken. Ikenna's breath came in ragged sobs now. He gripped his head like it might explode. All the calls, all the messages, all the missed chances. He had chosen pride. He had chosen silence. And now there was no one left to forgive him. In the hours that followed, Ikenna became a shadow in his own house. Tonia came downstairs and found him kneeling in the living room, eyes red, hands shaking. What happened? She asked, annoyed. He looked up at her with hatred. He died, he croaked. My father is dead. Tonia blinked. Oh. Then shrugged. Well, I guess he finally got what he wanted, peace. Something in Ikenna broke at that moment. He stood up slowly, rage simmering under the surface. He came back here. He was dying, and you sent him away. Tonia scoffed. I was protecting you. He was a liability. Ikenna's eyes narrowed. His hands curled into fists. You let my father die thinking I hated him, he whispered. The man who had slapped his father now realized that the slap was nothing compared to the abandonment that followed. And for the first time in his life, Ikenna wished he had never become rich. The morning after the call, Ikenna drove to the office, but never made it past the parking lot. He sat in his car, windows rolled up, the AC humming a low drone, while his mind played every moment he had missed. The memories of his father, standing at bus parks, sweating over school fees, offering daily prayers, rushed back with violent force. It was as if his childhood was suddenly more vivid than the glass and steel empire he had built around himself. He remembered Ikenna's voice whispering Igbo proverbs at night, his hands gently placing torn textbooks on a mat, his silence when there wasn't enough food. Ikenna sobbed like a child, his face in his palms, ashamed not only of the slap, but of the silence afterward. The unanswered calls were now ghosts, and every papa, not now, had become a nail in a coffin he never planned to see. He drove out of the compound, desperate for answers. His first stop was the driver who had once picked Ikenna from the bus park. Oga, if you like say I do bad, the driver stammered when Ikenna confronted him. Your papa come many times, even sit outside under the rain one day. The man's voice cracked. I tell madam, she say make I no tell you. Say na disgrace. Ikenna's knees gave way. He leaned against the car, bow rising in his throat. So he came, here, to this house, while I was inside. The man nodded, shame written all over him. Sometimes he go wait from morning till night, just for you to come out. Ikenna wanted to scream, to rip the walls down. But it wasn't the driver he was angry at. It was himself, for letting Tonia build a wall so thick around his heart that even a dying father couldn't get through. He got back into the car and drove to Mama Uche's number, the one who had called to break the news. She picked up almost immediately. Ah, my Pekin, she said with a heavy voice. So you finally call. Ikenna, trying to hold himself together, asked her everything. And she told him. Every visit, every call, every time Ikenna sat in the village compound coughing into a cloth, whispering, maybe he'll pick today. She told him of the time Ikenna collapsed in front of the house, clutching a paper bag with fruits he had brought for Ikenna. He never stopped loving you, she said, even after the slap. Even after your wife disgraced him. Ikenna cried openly. He left a letter, she added. It's under his Bible. You should come collect it, if you still remember the road to your home. Her words landed like judgment. Not angry, just true. For the first time in years, Ikenna felt completely bankrupt. And it had nothing to do with money. Ikenna stormed into the mansion like a man possessed. The door banged so loudly the maids dropped trays in fear. Tonia was upstairs, lounging in a robe, watching a fashion documentary on her tablet. She barely looked up when he entered their bedroom. What's with all the noise? You look like hell. Ikenna's eyes were sunken, his shirt wrinkled from being slept in. He walked up to her slowly, too calmly. You knew, he said. She raised a brow. Knew what? That my father came here. That he was sick. That he was begging to see me. Tonia smirked, adjusting her robe. Yes. I knew. And I told him to leave. I told him to go and die with his poverty. You're welcome. Her tone was casual, like she was recounting a sales receipt. Ikenna froze. You told him that? She shrugged. I was protecting our image. You're a billionaire, not a village mascot. He lunged. Not to strike her, but to grab the tablet from her lap and fling it against the wall, where it shattered like the last ounce of his patience. You killed him, he yelled. You let him die thinking his son hated him. Tonia stood now, indignant. Don't put that on me. You ignored his calls too. I didn't make you do that. You manipulated me, he shouted back. You filled my ears with your pride, your ego, your fake life. You made me ashamed of the man who raised me. Her eyes narrowed. He was a liability, Ikenna. An old, embarrassing liability. You're better off without him. In one swift motion, the slap came not from Ikenna this time, but from his son, finally regaining the part of himself he had lost. Tonia stumbled back, stunned. For a moment, the silence between them was thick and feral. Then she straightened, her voice cold and sharp. Thank you. You've just made this easier. Tonia filed for divorce the next day. And she didn't go quietly. She dragged Ikenna through the courts, leaking private footage of the slap as assault, portraying herself as a battered wife. His legal team, distracted and scattered, couldn't shield him fast enough. She sued for emotional distress, financial dependency, and physical violence. The court ruled in her favor. She took half of everything, his estates, shares, vehicles, even the Lagos apartment he built in Ikenna's name. The media tore into the scandal like vultures. From tech titan to wife beater, the headlines read. Ikenna didn't fight back. He didn't appeal. He didn't give a statement. Because for him, the damage was already done, and it was not to his reputation, but to his soul. His empire crumbled brick by brick, not because of the law, but because it had been built on silence, shame, and the bones of the very man who gave him everything. All that was left now was guilt. The mansion no longer echoed with the sound of celebration. Gone were the clinking glasses, the perfume-scented hallways, and the polished steps of celebrity visitors. The air was now still and heavy, suffocated by the weight of what had been lost. The staff moved like ghosts, afraid to speak above a whisper. Tonia had taken her exit with flair, packing in broad daylight, cameras flashing, her high heels clicking like war drums on the marble floor. She smiled for the paparazzi, waved to the press, and even posted a video captioned "Healing Begins" from her private spa retreat in South Africa. Ikenna watched the clips from his phone, alone in his study, sitting in the very chair where he had ignored his father's final calls. He didn't eat. He didn't bathe. He didn't speak. He simply sat, watching, remembering, regretting. Each room felt like a tomb. The hallway where Ikenna had once stood with a gift bag now felt haunted. The dining table where Ikenna once laughed with investors was now silent. The photos on the walls mocked him, glossy images of success, of smiles forced in front of magazine covers, of a man who thought he had everything. He deleted them one by one. He cleared out the wine cellar. He tore down the portraits. He entered the master bedroom and smashed the mirror until shards rained across the floor. In that fractured glass, he saw the man he had become, rich, yes, powerful once, but empty now. A son who buried his father in silence. A man who slapped love in the face and called it pride. When the divorce papers were finalized, Ikenna received the final inventory list, what he owned, what he lost, and what he had to surrender. He stared at the paper with dead eyes. In the column marked personal retained assets, only 3 items were listed: an old box of photos, a 2008 laptop, and a wristwatch Ikenna's. The one he had once sold to pay for Ikenna's exams. It had been returned to him quietly by Mama Uche after the funeral. Now, he held it in his hand, brushing the cracked glass with his thumb. The watch no longer worked. But to Ikenna, it ticked louder than any clock. Louder than money. Louder than fame. It ticked in his mind, counting down the years he wasted, the father he lost, and the forgiveness he never got. He closed his eyes and for the first time whispered aloud, "I'm sorry, Papa. I'm sorry." In the days that followed the divorce, Ikenna wandered through the mansion like a man who had inherited a graveyard. The walls still stood. The gold trimmings still sparkled. The air conditioners still blew chilled air through the empty corridors. But everything felt wrong, like a throne without a king. He stopped switching on the chandeliers. He unplugged the massive TV screens. The rooms that once roared with guests and corporate partners now groaned with silence. He often found himself seated in the dining room long after midnight, staring at an untouched plate of food. His appetite had gone, swallowed by the guilt that gnawed at his chest. He spoke to no one, not even his staff, who tiptoed around him like mourners at a wake. Even the dogs stopped barking. The house had become what his heart now was, a cold, hollow structure echoing with things left unsaid. Every night he found himself in the same place, the study where his father's calls had gone unanswered. He would sit in the high-backed leather chair, place his head on the mahogany desk, and replay the voicemails he had once ignored. Mama Uche had retrieved the old phone from Izina's belongings and given it to him during his brief visit to the village for the funeral. "Maybe hearing it will bring you peace," she had said, though her voice had no warmth. Now, Ikenna pressed play over and over. "My son, it's Papa. I just wanted to hear your voice. I miss you." The sound of that voice broke him every time. It was like a knife carving through his soul, soft but precise. He would scream, clutch his head, pound his fists against the walls, but nothing silenced the echo. Not even alcohol could dull it. He drank to forget, but it only made the guilt more vivid, more cruel. One afternoon, he entered the guest room where Izina had stayed during that fateful visit, the day of the slap. The bedsheet was neatly folded by the housekeeper, but the faint scent of his father's lotion still lingered in the air. Ikenna sat on the bed and cried until his voice cracked. He imagined Izina sitting there, praying for him, hoping to be seen, not as a burden, but as a father. The image shattered him. He reached under the mattress and found the wrapper his father had once brought, a faded green and brown pattern, now fraying at the edges. Holding it in his hands, Ikenna fell to the ground. "You didn't deserve that," he whispered. "You gave me everything, and I gave you silence." That night he did not sleep in his master bedroom. He curled on the guest room floor, holding the wrapper like a child clutching a memory. And for the first time, the billionaire felt truly, devastatingly poor. The journey to Yumadam was quiet. Ikenna didn't use his usual convoy or luxury SUV. He drove himself in a simple car dressed in plain clothes, no designer brands, no diamond wristwatches. Only the broken timepiece from his father dangled from his wrist, like a symbol of a time he could never rewind. The closer he got to the village, the heavier the air became. He remembered the road, well, every bend, every tree, every muddy path his father had walked with him in the rain. But this time there was no anticipation, only dread. His heart beat like a war drum. The compound came into view, the same place where he once ran barefoot as a boy, laughing into his father's arms. Now it stood like a monument of loss, quiet, brittle, and accusing. He parked by the gate and stepped out, unsure if he was welcome anymore. He wasn't. The moment the villagers saw him, they stopped in their tracks. Mama Uche, who had been sweeping the front of Izina's compound, froze. The group of men gathered under the mango tree fell silent. One of the elders, who had once proudly told others, "Izina's son is now a Lagos big man," now spat on the ground. The women selling tomatoes at the junction muttered beneath their breath. So he finally came. After he buried his father like a goat, one whispered. He should turn back, another hissed. Ikenna tried to greet them. "Good afternoon, Mama, Uncle," but they turned away. Not in anger, worse, in contempt. That deep, cold rejection that cuts deeper than any insult. One woman didn't hold back. "And so you now know road to this village? After your papa suffered alone and died like a stranger in his own house." Ikenna bowed his head. There was nothing to say, nothing that could undo the silence that had already buried his father. He made his way to the small house, his childhood home, where Mama Uche had kept everything intact. The compound was clean, the verandas swept. Inside, the room still smelled like camphor and prayer. He sat on the same bamboo bed where Izina had taken his last breath. His heart ached so violently he felt he would faint. On the table beside the bed lay the old Bible, and under it the envelope. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. He didn't open it right away. He just held it, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror across the room. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a lost son, a son who had abandoned his compass for applause, a man who let ego become his god. And as the villagers gathered outside, watching him like a ghost, he opened the letter, praying that forgiveness still lived in the ink. The letter was short, written in shaky handwriting, but filled with clarity. My son, I am not angry. I only hope you find your way back to yourself. I raised a man with kindness. Let the world not take that from you. If I don't see you again, know that I loved you till my last breath. That was it. No condemnation. No anger. Just love. It broke Ikenna all over again. He sat on the bed and wept like a child, heaving sobs that left his body shaking. When he stepped outside, the villagers were still gathered, arms crossed, waiting. He tried to speak. I know I failed him, he began, voice low. I know I failed all of you. But a man stepped forward, a younger cousin. Your wealth buried him, not your love. The others nodded. He suffered alone, yet he prayed for you daily, another said. He came to die with us, not with you. As Ikenna moved through the village, the hostility followed. Children whispered and pointed. That's the man who slapped his papa. A vendor refused to take his money. Keep your blood money, she said, shoving his hand away. The elders refused to see him. They said he was a curse. We held that man in high honor, one barked. And you made him leave this world in tears. Ikenna didn't defend himself. How could he? Every insult was earned. Every rejection deserved. That night, he returned to the compound and sat under the mango tree where Ikenna once told him stories. The tree had grown taller, its leaves darker. He imagined his father sitting across from him, smiling faintly. You came back, the imagined voice said. But it wasn't enough. Not now. The living had buried the man, but the dead still held the last word. He slept outside on the cement bench that night, mosquitoes biting his ankles, cold air wrapping around his bones. But he didn't care. It felt right to suffer. He needed to feel what his father felt, the weight of being forgotten. That morning, as the cock crowed, he tried again, offering to fund a health center in Ikenna's name. But the villagers laughed. So we should name our clinic after a man you starved with your pride. Ikenna walked away, humiliated, hollowed out. He had lost his father, his marriage, his status, and now even his home. The slap that started it all had echoed far beyond skin. It had burned through blood, memory, and legacy. And now, all that remained was a grave he hadn't truly faced. Ikenna stayed in the village house longer than he had planned. Each day he remained, the walls seemed to echo his father's presence, soft footsteps, quiet prayers, the rustle of newspaper pages on slow mornings. But it was the Bible that haunted him most. It wasn't just a book of verses now, it was a container of grief. Ikenna's fingerprints were still on the leather cover, and between its pages were markings, notes and margins, tear stains on psalms of suffering and forgiveness. Ikenna ran his fingers over the underlined verse in Psalm 27. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. The irony choked him. His father had not forsaken him. He had. And now the only thing left of Ikenna's voice was the brittle paper under those trembling hands. The letter he had read once was read again, then again, until the words blurred with tears. Each time they stabbed deeper. Not with accusation, but with mercy he didn't deserve. On the third morning, Ikenna found a second letter hidden between pages in Ezekiel, one that had been overlooked during his first frantic reading. This one was even shorter, written the week before Ikenna's death. It read, I saw you in my dream last night, Ikenna. You were kneeling. I tried to reach out, but you didn't see me. You were crying. I pray one day you'll come home, not just with feet, but with heart. I forgive you already. Find peace before peace forgets your name. The words sank like iron into Ikenna's chest. Peace had indeed forgotten him. He had millions in the bank, but not a moment of rest in his spirit. He walked around with the letter in his pocket now, like a cross he had to carry. And yet, it still couldn't bring his father back. Regret, he was learning, is the one disease wealth cannot cure. That evening, the power went out in the village, something the city had spoiled him against. But as the darkness settled in, he lit an old lantern and sat beneath the mango tree with the Bible open on his lap. He stared up at the stars and wondered if Ikenna had ever looked up like this, praying for a prodigal son to return. His thoughts spiraled. He began to whisper the stories his father used to tell him as a child. At first, the words felt foreign, but slowly they returned. The folk tales, the parables, the Igbo proverbs that once anchored his boyhood. He whispered them to the wind, hoping it would carry them to wherever his father's soul rested. He stayed under the tree till morning, clutching the Bible like it was his only lifeline. In many ways, it was. Sleep came to Ikenna in fragments now disjointed, restless episodes filled with faces and sounds from his past. But one night, as the wind howled through the cracks in the roof and the air felt thick with memory, he dreamt with disturbing clarity. He found himself back in the Lagos mansion, but it was dark. The marble floors were cracked. The chandeliers hung like limp skeletons. He walked through the halls, calling his father's name. "Papa? Papa, where are you?" But no voice replied, only the echoes of his own footsteps. Then, in the corner of the living room where Ikenna once stood with his bag, a faint light appeared. There stood his father, older than ever, wrapped in the green and brown wrapper he had brought as a gift. His face was not angry. It was wet with tears. He said nothing, just looked at Ikenna, as if expecting an apology that never came. Ikenna stepped forward, trying to speak, but his mouth would not open. He reached out to touch his father's hand, but Ikenna stepped back into the shadows. "No, Papa, wait," Ikenna cried. But the darkness swallowed him whole. He woke up in a sweat, choking on the silence. For minutes he couldn't breathe, his hands clawing at his chest like he was being buried alive. He stumbled outside into the night, barefoot, shirt soaked. He fell to his knees on the wet soil. "I'm sorry," he screamed to the empty sky. "I'm sorry, Papa. Please, please." But there was no answer, only the wind whispering through the trees and the far-off howl of a dog. The dream became a nightly curse. Some nights, Ikenna turned away from him. Other nights, he reached out but vanished before Ikenna could grab him. In every version, Ikenna was left with nothing but his own voice, broken, begging, too late. The villagers noticed his decline. They no longer mocked him. Now they simply pitied him. Mama Uche tried to get him to eat, but he refused most meals. His eyes were sunken, his clothes now loose on his frame. "You will die like this," she warned him one morning. "You will follow him." But Ikenna only stared at her with eyes that had forgotten the meaning of tomorrow. "Maybe that's fair," he whispered. "Maybe that's what I deserve." She slapped his shoulder gently. "You don't die to repay a debt, my son. You live. You live and do better." But her words floated past him like smoke. What did better look like? What did repentance look like when the only person you needed it from was already in the grave? Each day he remained in the village was a reminder that love delayed too long turns into mourning. And he was mourning with every breath. The village square was buzzing with activity that Saturday. It was the annual Ofala gathering, when elders and titled men met to discuss community matters and honor those who had served the people. Ikenna sat quietly in the back, not invited, but not brave enough to stay away. He wore simple clothes and avoided the eyes of others. Mama Uche had insisted he come. "You can't mourn in hiding forever," she said. He obeyed, but every footstep toward the square felt like a trial. The elders sat under the canopy, dressed in regal red caps and flowing Isiago fabrics. They spoke in measured tones, pausing for effect, addressing community issues, road repairs, school funds, land disputes. Then one man stood and changed the tone entirely. "We must also remember those who dishonor their fathers," he said, casting a sharp glance toward Ikenna. Because if we honor the dead and forget how they died, we are not a community. We are cowards. The words pierced the air like thunder. People turned, eyes fixed on Ikenna. The speaker, an elder known for his bluntness, continued. Ikenna was one of us. He raised his son with his back bent and his belly empty. And what did he get in return? Silence. Rejection. A burial that tasted of shame. Some nodded. Others murmured. The elder pointed directly at Ikenna now. You used your wealth not to give him a good life, but to give him a glamorous funeral. Shame on you. The square fell into a stunned silence. Ikenna stood slowly, lips trembling. I know, he said. I know I failed him. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. I just came to say, I'm sorry. To all of you. But mostly to him. He bowed his head deeply. Some scoffed. Some looked away. And some quietly wept. But no one clapped. No one welcomed him back. Because regret without repair is a currency no one accepts. Ikenna left the square that day with mud on his sandals and tears in his eyes. But something had shifted. Not in the crowd. In himself. The shame had reached its peak. He had nothing else to hide behind. No wife. No mansion. No company. Just his grief and his father's memory. And in that moment, for the first time, he didn't resist it. He allowed himself to be broken. Fully. Publicly. The shame wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a path. The beginning of something. Perhaps healing. Perhaps justice. Perhaps a new way to carry his father's name, not on headlines or business cards, but in the quiet way he chose to live going forward. He walked back to the compound slowly, the wind brushing against his face like a tired father's final blessing. It was a week after the Ofala gathering when Ikenna made the announcement. He had gathered some elders, youths, and women leaders at the same village square that once turned their backs on him. He wore a white senator outfit, plain, clean, but not flashy. His shoes were dusty from the walk. He had refused a car that day. There was no microphone, no media. Just a man and his broken voice. I want to donate 2 plots of land, he said slowly, his voice cracking, to build a health center in Papa's name, so that no other father in this village will die waiting for a call that never comes. Some villagers murmured, others looked skeptical. And I'll fund it fully myself, no strings. The land belongs to the community, not to me. An elder cleared his throat. After all you've done, why now? Ikenna lowered his head. Because now is all I have left. For a moment, there was silence. Then a woman's voice rang out, sharp, bitter. You think your father needed a health center? He needed love. It was the same tomato vendor who had refused his money days ago. You slapped him, drove him to die far from your eyes, and now you want to clear your conscience with cement and bricks. Ikenna didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. You're right. This won't bring him back. It won't cleanse what I did. But if his name stands above a place where people are healed, maybe his soul will find rest. The woman blinked, shocked at his calm. Another man shouted, You think we'll name it after Ikenna? Never. Let your father's name rest in peace. Not on a plaque built from guilt. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ikenna stepped back, face pale but calm. He didn't argue. Then let it be anonymous, he said quietly. Let the center exist, even if no one ever remembers who built it. He turned to leave, his head bowed, his heart heavy. But before he got far, Mama Uche rose from the back. She walked slowly, eyes misty, voice trembling. Let the center be built, she said. Name or no name. This man is broken. Let the broken serve the living. A hush fell over the gathering. Then, slowly, another elder nodded. A few others stood. The tide did not turn in applause, but in reluctant, tired grace. Ikenna didn't smile. He only breathed. Later that evening, he sat by the farmland, watching the orange sun dip beneath the horizon. Papa, he whispered, they may never accept me, but I'll keep building until you forgive me from wherever you are. He pulled out the broken wristwatch, still not ticking, and tied it to the branch of the mango tree beside him. Let it hang there, like time frozen at the moment everything went wrong. and like the life he was trying to start over. The cemetery was silent. No visitors, no mourners, just the wind rustling through tall grass and the low groan of distant trees. The grave was simple, a low concrete slab with a handmade cross and a fading inscription. Ikenna, Joseph, loving father, silent martyr. No flowers, no granite, no golden epitaphs. Just earth, silence, and memory. Ikenna stood at the edge of the grave, a bag slung over his shoulder, his suit dusty and sweat-drenched from the long walk. He had walked the last mile barefoot, an act of repentance, not ritual. He stood there for a long time, head bowed, arms trembling. The words were stuck in his throat, so he dropped to his knees, not gently, like a penitent collapsing at an altar. His fingers touched the earth like it was sacred. "Papa," he whispered, "I came late. But I came." He pulled the zipper of his bag and brought out a few items, each one trembling in his hand. The first was the letter Ikenna had written, the one that had been read, folded, reread, and worn thin with tears. He placed it gently on the slab. "This is all I have of you now," he said. The second was the wristwatch, his father's old timepiece, no longer working. He kissed it, then laid it at the head of the grave. "You bought me time with your sacrifice, and I wasted mine." The third was a framed photo, Ikenna and Ikenna, taken when Ikenna graduated from a university. Ikenna was beaming. Ikenna looked proud. He wiped the glass and placed it by the foot of the grave. Then, with shaking hands, he removed the Rolex from his own wrist, one of the few things he had left after the divorce, and laid it on the photo. "I built my life on speed. You built yours on strength. You win, Papa. You always did." He remained on his knees long after the sun had vanished behind the clouds. He prayed aloud, not for riches, not for redemption, but for rest. "If there is anything after this life," he whispered, "please find peace there. And if you ever see me in your dreams, don't walk away next time." His tears soaked the soil. The grave didn't speak. The wind didn't shift. But something inside Ikenna did. He stood up slowly, not with pride, but with a strange kind of quiet. He had been emptied. And now maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing. As he turned to walk away, a child ran past the cemetery fence, chasing a torn football. The boy looked up at him and smiled. "Good afternoon, sir." Ikenna forced a weak smile. "Good afternoon, my son." For the first time in years, the word son tasted human again. Fade to black. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.